Welcome to the Robotics Through Science Fiction podcast. I'm Robin Murphy, and I'm sheltering in place from the COVID-19 pandemic, thinking a lot about the Andromeda Strain and about the new sequel, The Andromeda Evolution, which is a fun read and a great book for exploring brain-machine interfaces for robots. Now, of course, The Andromeda Strain by Michael Crichton is the classic science fiction novel. I mean, when it was published in 1969, it created the whole techno-thriller genre. And if you look through the technology.com website, it's the first work of fiction where robots are used for a biological outbreak. So, 51 years later, here we are, and Daniel H. Wilson, the author of the more recent classic Robopocalypse, has written an authorized sequel, The Andromeda Evolution. It's fast-paced, it has the same military after-action report style of writing, and the characters use lots of robots in realistic ways, especially as the protagonist is James Stone, son of Jeremy Stone, the Project Wildfire team lead from the first novel, and he's a roboticist. Yay! There's even a surprise reveal near the end of the novel. Overall, it's a great read, and it's recommended for both fans and for those who like hard science fiction thrillers. When the Andromeda Strain was published, the standard for working with hazardous materials was those cumbersome robot manipulators that were originally developed in 1948 to handle radioactive material. Raymond Gertz, at that time working for Argonne National Laboratory, which is now part of the Department of Energy, developed a mechanical bilateral master-slave manipulator. Bilateral master-slave manipulator doesn't exactly trip off the tongue, so it was ripe for a nickname. And fortunately, 6 years earlier, Robert Heinlein had written a popular sci-fi short story, Waldo, which centered around a robot working with nuclear material. So as a result, Waldo became the common term for referring to those types of manipulators. And indeed, a lot of teleoperators are just considered Waldos. So it's a pretty common term. Now, in this clip from the Andromeda Strain movie, you can see how those Waldo arms work and the relatively unnatural movements that an operator has to use to get those arms to accomplish the task. Ick. In real life, teleoperators often get carpal tunnel syndrome, and so it's no surprise when you think about trying to do that for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. George Lucas's movie, THX 1138, also had Waldos, and you can see why the operators had to be drugged to deal with using those arms. So, despite the appalling user experience, which is a tribute to how people adapt to their tools, the robots work, they fill an important niche, and the Department of Energy still uses them to this day. Now, as a side note, I was part of a VIP roboticist team that visited Japanese and DOE facilities in the United States to evaluate the use of robots for decommissioning the US's highly contaminated, really aging in a bad way, Cold War nuclear facilities. And so we suggested replacing the Waldos with more advanced robots and more user-friendly teleoperation mechanisms, and that would prevent the costly and life-threatening accidents that sometimes happens from time to time. And the DoD official said, yeah, the Waldos, though, were so pervasively used that people were already trained on them that the economics to replace the robots and to rebuild the hot cells and retrain the workers just didn't economically justify the switch. New was better, but not that much better. Okay, well, anyway, the Andromeda Strain only has Waldo robots. The Andromeda Evolution has lots of robots. There are drones with some amazing battery life, 2 real-life robots, the Canadarm Robonaut, yay, robot crawlers, and lots of teleoperation. And of all the robots used by the characters in the book, perhaps the most interesting are the ones that are being used by Dr. Sophie Klein through a brain-machine interface, or BMI. Now, Klein has juvenile amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which motivated her and her parents, I presume, to be a very early adopter of BMI. And through her extraordinary intellect and drive, she's on the International Space Station as an astronaut. And she's a member of the secret Project Wildfire team that has been on the lookout for the past 50 years for more instances of the Andromeda strain, or worse yet, a new version, hence the evolution part, right? Interestingly, Heinlein had been inspired to write Waldo by a popular science article on a man with myasthenia gravis who was using a mechanical arm to help compensate for his disease. So this kind of goes full circle back to a BMI for Sophie Klein. Anyway, back to the Andromeda evolution. This introduces the question of what are brain-machine interfaces and what's their status in real life? Well, brain-machine interfaces are primarily being researched for control of prosthesis, prosthetic legs and arms. Currently, a person moves that prosthetic either through a bone cable, and that transfers movements from other muscles, or through a non-invasive detection of EMG or EEG signals. And those are indirect neural indications of what the user is mentally commanding that missing limb to do. Now, that's technically using non-invasive indicators. That's technically a brain-machine interface, but the term actually connotes a direct invasive link between the actual part of the brain that's generating the movement commands, linking it to the device itself. And the advantage here is that that direct link allows a more precise and faster movement. So BMI is always, that secret sauce in cyborgs in fiction, like Alita Battle Angel or the lovely short story Messenger. In theory, you don't have to be wearing a prosthetic to use a BMI. You could control a remote robot, teleoperate with a BMI. BMI research has many research challenges with that whole invasive interface thing. I mean, one is that the tissue interface itself, the actual merging of hardware with the body. Many of the materials that are being used in the computer hardware are toxic when they're implanted in humans. So that means the implant may damage and eventually destroy the neurons that's connected to. Size is a problem too, in the sense of that neurons are very small and there are very many of them that do the control. And so the interfaces are a little big and bulky. They need to be able to work at that smaller scale and take advantage of the density of the neurons to get finer, more precise control. Another challenge is where to put the interface. I mean, where to insert it in the brain. Somewhere in the cortex really isn't specific enough. And then when you think about that you're really poisoning or damaging your cortex over time, that's a pretty scary thought. So the journals Frontiers in Neuroscience and Nature have some nice summary articles, which are listed in the text version of this podcast. But anyway, back to the Andromeda evolution. It's accurate, hard science, great, wonderful. Is it fun or is it really dry? It's fun. It's fun. Ignore the negative book reviews. They are just way lower than they should be. Most of the negative reviews I perused were either, how dare he touch the original? Whatever. The characters are flat. Yeah, like the characters in the original book were well fleshed out. I mean, let's be honest, Crichton didn't write character-driven fiction. And, oh, it was too far out and not like Crichton. Really? Really? Did any of you ever read his 2002 book, Prey? That one took a left turn with swarm robots and just kept on going, okay? So don't be dissuaded by the reviews. The Andromeda Evolution is well worth reading, both for the plot and for the real robots. Yay, robots. And who knows, maybe in the next pandemic, you'll be using the BMI to control a robot back at the workplace while you shelter in place with, or maybe from, the kids. So remember, if you want to learn more about robotics, check out my books and remember to subscribe to our newsletter and YouTube channel